I'm sure you've seen this mouse before, even if you're not overly interested in gaming peripherals, which alone serves as a testament to the legacy this mouse has left behind. This is the final mouse Starlight 12, the product that brought the more niche side of the mouse market into the mainstream, introducing so many people to this hobby and providing a precedent for a product of this nature, along with the recent increases in price tags. But what has separated this mouse from the other lesser known mice released before it? The hype leading up to the Starlight's release was unprecedented, inspiring numerous other companies to attempt to emulate it with minimal success. I think that the secret to the hype behind the Starlight is all in the unique marketing and style Final Mouse chose for it. The mouse's advertising consistently touted three main features that set it apart from others at the time. The first two are its low weight due to its magnesium shell, and its supposedly unmatched latency. Remember these two claims because we'll come back to them later. There were also the aesthetics of the mouse, which were definitely over the top. I think some of the variants look fantastic, specifically the Poseidon and the Phantom. The engraving on the clicks wasn't something that was seen before and added to the overall look, helping to make the design of the mouse extremely memorable and stand out from anything else on the market at the time. The project that really skyrocketed this hype train though was the announcement of Final Mouse's game Aim Gods. Aim Gods had a leaderboard system, and the people who placed highly on it would receive the mouse for free besides the entry cost of $30. This all contributed to an unmatched marketing campaign for a mouse, perpetuated by people playing and streaming the game with the hopes of getting the legendary Starlight for free and avoiding that daunting $190 price tag. To help bring this hype together, Final Mouse hosted a $250,000 tournament and invited top streamers like Summit to play, which furthered the hype and drove more sales despite the game being terrible. So when the mouse finally did release, was the Starlight able to live up to the hype from the community, and did Final Mouse live up to their bold claims made before release? And why should you not buy the Starlight 12 if it's a good mouse? But first, I think for full transparency, it's important to mention that neither myself or my girlfriend B, who helped with some of the more technical stuff for this review, paid for this mouse. It was sent to us for free by a viewer, and we are super grateful even if I say some negative things about it in the review. It is also slightly modded, so we can't comment on things like quality control issues on our copies, or things like the clicks or scroll wheel in too much depth. The first aspect I want to discuss here is the shape, and what stands out initially about it, especially on the small version, is just how tiny it is. Looking at the mouse next to the GPX or even other small mice like the Razer Viper Mini shows this, with the Starlight being completely dwarfed, and this is reflected in its hand feel. The visual comparison on Elo Shapes backs this up, showing the Starlight is a lot shorter and flatter than the GPX, and it doesn't fill out your palm as much compared to the Viper Mini due to the Starlight's lower profile. This, combined with the low weight compared to the two aforementioned mice, made it feel great in games like Apex or Overwatch, where smooth tracking and clean adjustments are essential. This did come with a trade-off for me though, which was flicks. Due to the central hump of the mouse, I didn't have that palm support I was used to. It took a bit of adjusting, and even afterwards, I'm not sure I had the same stability as on a mouse with a more pronounced hump like the HTS Plus, which I can still track well on. Due to this, I do think I aim worse overall on the Starlight than some other mice that have more pronounced back humps, which I think is due to how it's easier to practice the micro adjustments and smoothness from a stable foundation, rather than trying to gain that stable foundation on the Starlight, which felt less controllable in the first place. At least that's how it was for me. I do worry that my experience with this mouse might be a bit of an outlier though, for two reasons. The first is that I have smaller hands, and that low weight tracking experience only worked for me because I could still get a decently comfortable grip on the Starlight even though it was so small. For people with medium to large hands, I can definitely see the size being a major issue, assuming that you don't fingertip grip. B's hands are significantly wider than mine, and she couldn't grip it comfortably whatsoever, and she actually ended up getting hand cramps after extended use just from how thin the mouse was. Now onto the weight of the mouse itself. As much as I've been praising it throughout this review, it's important to acknowledge Final Mouse's misleading marketing surrounding this mouse. Back to the tweet I showed earlier for a second, the claim was 37 grams and next generation wireless. Pretty impressive claim. Unfortunately, they couldn't live up to it whatsoever. The advertised weight for the Starlight 12 Small is 42 grams and the medium is 47. Most copies I've seen though are 44 and 49 respectively, and while that is still impressive and it did feel nice to use, it's nowhere near what this tweet claimed, and there were also some sacrifices needed to achieve this weight in the first place. Besides the size of the mouse not accommodating everyone, the mouse is covered in holes, and while they normally don't bother me on mice, these holes kept leaving imprints on my fingers after longer periods of use. However, this issue can be addressed with grip tape. One thing they didn't sacrifice to achieve this weight though was the battery life. It's second only to the G Pro Superlight out of the wireless mice I've tried so far, and it can easily last a week or more of use without a charge, which is super impressive. Returning to their tweet again for a moment, and ignoring the 2-month of battery life claim, which is, yeah, okay. They also claim the mouse has latency speeds faster than any wired or wireless mouse in existence, which just isn't true, even taking into account that it was a year and a bit ago now. The Starlight 12 uses the branded final sensor, which is likely to just be a slightly modified 3370 with a fairly standard implementation. When this script was written, the Starlight had notoriously bad click latency, being on par with mice that retail for up to $150 less than it. However, to their credit, the firmware for the mouse has been updated since, and it's on par with other modern gaming mice like the Pulsar X2 or Lamzo Atlantis, but it is still behind the G Pro Superlight. Looking at House Gaming's data for motion latency specifically, the Starlight falls behind in motion latency, having 2 ms delay versus the Atlantis' 1 ms versus the control unit, and once again Logitech and Razer are quite far ahead. Far from the fastest mouse ever, but not horrible by any means. Like everything else though, this has to be looked at relative to the price. When you're paying this much for a mouse, more than almost anything else on the market at the moment, you should be getting premium everything. And it feels like the Starlight 12 cuts corners compared to a lot of other wireless options at the moment, especially in regards to quality control, or the lack thereof, and it feels like it's almost become infamous at this point for just how bad it actually is. B asked people for their experiences with the Starlight's quality control on Twitter and got these replies. I'm not going to read them all out loud, but you can pause and read them if you're interested. Common issues included stuff like double-clicking, misaligned scroll wheel, reverse scrolling, DPI deviation, and just a multitude of struggles with the firmware. I don't think I've ever heard of anyone with a perfect Starlight copy, which at this price point is just kinda ridiculous. The other thing I really dislike about the Starlight is the group buys system it had. They would release the mice in limited drops that would sell out almost instantly, a good chunk of which were bought by people only looking to resell or bots set to buy them for the same reason. And for the first few drops there was basically no bot prevention. Because of this, only a very small number of people buying the mouse actually intended to use it, with far more being put up very quickly onto the secondhand market after release, leading to massive price increases. They did address this somewhat for later launches, but they still sold out insanely quickly, and I wouldn't have been able to get my hands on one due to me being in Australia, and the launch is happening at very inconvenient hours for me. At the end of the day though, it all just comes back to value. For $190, I don't think the Starlight stands up to mice released today, or even mice available at the time, even if it did innovate in some areas. The combination of lack of availability, plentiful quality control issues, and of course that price tag means I just can't recommend it, despite really liking the low profile and low weight. If you're really keen to try the Starlight shape, the Vancer Caster is a solid option, which is almost exactly the same shape as the Starlight Medium and is in the mid 50 gram range. The HTX or HTS Plus both have better specs than the Starlight while being similar weights, with the HTS being around 48 grams and the HTX being as low as 36 depending on what model you select. These three mice are $90, $100 and $110 respectively, and are all much better value than the Starlight 12. Something I'm sure people will be wondering is, isn't it a bit late for a Starlight 12 review? The mouse is almost 2 years old now, and Final Mouse have already begun to hype up their next release, the Ultralight X. Still, I think that makes the Starlight 12 and the misleading marketing behind it all the more relevant. The next time you see a post from Final Mouse talking about their tech, or especially their ultra low weight, remember the differences between Final Mouse's marketing and the reality before making any purchases. As I hope I've shown here, it's important to not get caught up in hype trains like everyone did for the Starlight 12. Now that's all I have to say about the Starlight itself, but while I was working on this video, Infinity Mice offered to send me one of their mods for the Starlight, the Pro Hump V2. First, what is it? It's a custom back shell that's supposed to change the shape and feel of the mouse, and before it actually arrived I was skeptical of how different it would be, but the difference for me is night and day. Earlier I mentioned how when using this mouse I felt it lacked palm support. This addresses that issue by shifting the hump further backwards, providing that previously missing support. If you grip how I do and you have similar hands, this should feel great to use. Since the low profile and weight remains, micro adjustments still feel easy on it and it's just super comfortable for me overall. It's completely changed the feel of the mouse and it's a lot more pleasant to use now. The closest comparison for me I think is the M42 with the back hump. While it doesn't offer as much palm support and is a bit thinner overall than the M42, I prefer the higher button height and width on the Starlight 12 in comparison, with the extra palm support provided by the mod. Going back to the normal Starlight shape felt really strange afterwards, honestly. It was like something was missing, which is about as high praise as I can really give for this. Installing the mod was also pretty easy. There's a good guide on their website, and while you do need a fairly uncommon screwdriver for it, once I got that, it took about 10 minutes in total to install. I think the main issue for me with this product is the colour matching. I have the Poseidon Starlight and they don't have an infinity hump for that model yet, and the TENS one with the Poseidon shell doesn't look great. The height also isn't aligned perfectly. The hump on the side sits slightly below the buttons, which didn't bother me during use, and it's perfectly aligned towards the center, but it's still something worth noting. The other thing is the increase in weight, which brings the mouse up maybe 2 grams, which isn't a deal breaker for me, but it might be for some people. All that being said though, if you have the Starlight and you have tried something like the M42 and you enjoyed that shape, then it might be worth the money for you. But I think for most people that dislike the Starlight shape, the $40 that the Pro Hump costs is better spent towards a new mouse entirely, especially since the Starlight 12 has held its price so well in the second-hand market, making reselling it a viable option in that situation. At the end of the day though, it all just comes down to value, and even though the product is, in my opinion, amazing, it's hard to justify their asking price, just like the Starlight itself.